In 1910, elderly Rockford, Illinois widow Mary McIntosh was brutally murdered in her own home. When asked why he would do such a horrible thing, Clinton St. Clair said simply, "I was out of a job and needed money and would kill to get some." Although neighbors told police that Mrs. McIntosh was afraid to be alone and kept locks and chains on her doors, when the killer knocked on her door at 1 a.m., Mary let him in. Welcome to an audio version of an original article by Kathi Kresol, operator of Haunted Rockford Paranormal Events, Rockford, Illinois. This audio presentation is entitled The Fury of a Demon and contains the 2015 story of the same name. The story originally appeared in the book Murder and Mayhem in Rockford, Illinois by Kathi Kresol. This audio article was produced by Thomas Saunders for Haunted Rockford. Mary McIntosh's maiden name was Mary Grieve, and she was born in Scotland. She married Thomas Lang in 1850 in Roxburghshire, Scotland. They came with Lang's family to America and settled in Ohio, where Thomas died in 1851. Mary then married Anthony McIntosh in Cleveland, Ohio, and they lived there for several years before moving to Rockford. They had no children, and when Anthony died, Mary was left all alone. Mary McIntosh was murdered in her own home at 1339 West State Street on the corner of West State Street and Forest Avenue on Thursday, January 20th, 1910. Her body was horribly mutilated and found in her living room. The newspapers of the day stated that, according to those who knew her, Mrs. McIntosh spent days, weeks, months, and even years in a big armchair and even slept in it. She was what is known today as a hoarder. The newspapers described all the clutter that filled the house, stating that the furniture was piled high with articles that she had been hoarding for 15 years. For years, friends and neighbors tried to talk Mary into leaving her squalid home. She always refused and talked about her faith that she was going to get better and get her strength back. The friends would stop in regularly to visit. They also told the police that Mary came from a fine family in Scotland. Mary's mind had become a little unbalanced after she ran into some trouble with her finances in the 1890s. No one knew her exact age, but would put her at least 80 years old. Mary lived in Rockford for at least 50 years. Her husband, Anthony, built their house on West State Street. Anthony worked at the Emerson plant for years, but was also known for his carpentry skills. He built a little one-story cottage, but then added the two-story wing. He passed away 25 years prior to Mary's murder. By all accounts, Anthony left his wife very comfortably settled financially. Then in 1890, Mary invested with a real estate man in whom she had complete faith. Unfortunately, her faith in him was a mistake, and though not left penniless by the bad investment, she lost quite a lot of money. This appeared to change Mary, and her family noticed she became bitter. Uncharacteristically, she started to quarrel with her neighbors and their children. Mary's milkman, Henry Branthower, discovered her body on his daily visit at around 11 a.m. on the cold January day in 1910. Henry thought that Mrs. McIntosh had just passed away from a fall. Her body lay just inside the front door, her head in a pool of blood. The milkman thought she might have hit her head when she fell. For some unknown reason, instead of calling the police, Branthower called the McAllister drugstore to report his find to the druggist there, Mr. McAllister, who told him to notify the police. The police arrived and had to force the door open because Mary's body blocked it. Further questioning revealed that groceries had been delivered to the McIntosh home around 9:30 a.m. The delivery boy had actually entered the house through the back, set down the bag, and left. He did notice blood on the snowy path that led to Forest Avenue. He followed the shoe prints all the way to the back of the property. These would later be identified as bloody footprints from the murderer. The mailman, Fred Kronk, was the first to turn up any solid evidence. He was on his way back from a lunch break at his house at 201 South Central Avenue when he found an envelope containing two $10 gold pieces close to Central Avenue. These were with other envelopes bearing Mary McIntosh's name. Other mail was found all the way to Independence Avenue, blocks away from Mary's house. Kronk turned these over to the police. He was very surprised to hear that Mary had been murdered. The attack, the police surmised, had happened right where her body lay. They thought that she had opened the door to someone and would have been powerless to fend off an attack. The only motive that could be offered by the police was robbery. Mary was not known to have a lot of money in the house, but when the coroners were conducting the autopsy, they discovered a mark around Mary's waist that could have come from a money belt that she must have worn for years. This fact led them to believe that whoever had made the attack on this poor defenseless woman must have had knowledge of the belt. Mary's body told the tragic tale of the attack. She had a bruise on her forehead right above her right eye. This was the blow that hopefully rendered her unconscious. What came next is horrible enough that it helps to think that she was not conscious for it. It does not make it any easier to understand why someone would attack this defenseless woman who was in such a weakened state. The attacker slashed her throat not once but twice. The first slash was about 5 inches long, described by the paper as a ragged cut that gaped widely. The second wound was deep and severed her windpipe, making it impossible for her to cry for help. There were 3 more cuts on the body, including a cut that disemboweled her. Coroner McAllister theorized that the cut on her abdomen was made while removing the belt that held her money and papers. Another piece of evidence that this was not a random attack was the condition of the house. Even if a stranger had broken in, the mess in the rooms would have turned him back, no matter what his previous idea had been, the police stated. Mary collected many items and stacked up clutter in every room of her house. It was obvious from the state of her home that she only used the room that was her living room. Bedrooms held beds, but everything was filled with clutter and rubbish covered the floors. Men who dealt with Mary for her finances stated they did not know of the money belt, and that, as far as they knew, Mary kept her money in the bank. Neighbors told the police that Mary McIntosh was very afraid in her later years. She kept all the doors locked and windows shuttered. They said she spoke of her fear often. Clinton St. Clair, who lived at 1330 Quarry Street, was arrested on January 21, 1910, for the murder of Mary McIntosh. St. Clair admitted he had committed the murder at 1 o'clock on Thursday morning and got $30 or $72, depending on the version, for his crime. St. Clair was around 30 years of age, had a short build, and weighed about 225 pounds. He was described as a man of less than ordinary intelligence. There was a great amount of evidence that pointed to St. Clair. Police found clothing that was thought to have come from the McIntosh home inside St. Clair's house. There was blood on the coat he wore when he was arrested, and bloody footprints left in the snow leading away from the McIntosh house that matched his shoe size. They found scraps of clothing in a closet at his home that St. Clair thought he had burned. The final piece of evidence used against Clinton St. Clair was an envelope that was found on the ground outside of the McIntosh home. It was mixed up in a stack of paperwork from inside the home. The envelope was from Clinton St. Clair's wife, Bertha, to Fred Conaway of Stillman Valley. It was a plea to inquire if Conaway had any work for her husband. It was this envelope that would lead police straight to St. Clair. St. Clair's wife had given him the letter to mail on Wednesday night, and it was found by Sergeant Reed in a stack of papers. The letter was in 3 pieces, but the police taped it back together to read it. The police took the letter to Fred Conaway to find out the identity of the Bertha and Clint mentioned in the letter. By the time the officers arrived at the St. Clair house, everyone was in bed. The police woke them up and took Bertha and Clinton down to headquarters to be questioned. Other officers searched the house while the St. Clairs were being interviewed. It was during this search that the garments from the McIntosh house were found. All of the garments were covered in blood, including a white underskirt. Mrs. St. Clair claimed that she and her husband had attended a friend's party on Wednesday evening and that she did not return home that night. Her husband left the party at 11 p.m. According to St. Clair's statement, he had shown up at Mary's house around 1 o'clock in the morning. He rapped on the door and was admitted by Mrs. McIntosh. St. Clair demanded money from Mary, who claimed she didn't have any. St. Clair then knocked her over the head, used a pocket knife to cut her throat, and then disemboweled her. When asked why he would do such a horrible thing, he claimed, "I was out of a job and needed money and would kill to get some." This was not the first time that Clinton St. Clair had been questioned about his role in a death. 2 years prior to the McIntosh murder, he was questioned about the death of Mrs. Lang, who was killed on the Burlington tracks near Chair Factory B. She had been ground to pieces on the tracks when she was run over by a train. When questioned about Lang's death, St. Clair stated that they had both been very drunk and that he had passed out and had no idea what had happened to Lang. There was not enough evidence to prove his guilt, and the police had to let him go. The most damning evidence in the McIntosh murder was the knife that was found on him when he was searched. It was a double-edged dagger with a large blade. There were strands of hair stuck in blood dried on the blade. State's Attorney North and Chief Bargren complimented the good police work by Sergeant Reed when he picked up the letter and all that followed. Later, St. Clair's wife would try to explain his bursts of violence with a story of a bite from a mad dog. She said that the whole family thought he would eventually go mad. Mrs. St. Clair also said that her husband was a good, gentle man except when he would have his fits or when he was drinking. St. Clair was described as a simple man. The sheriff stated that he grew agitated if questioned about the crime, but was calm otherwise. He ate and slept well during his incarceration. Neither St. Clair nor his wife seemed to understand the severity of the crime and the possibility of the death sentence. Their friends seemed to step around the topic when visiting Clinton in jail. State's Attorney Harry B. North decided to ask for the death penalty due to the gruesome nature of the murder. B.A. Knight was chosen as the defense lawyer, and the presiding judge was Judge Frost. Clinton St. Clair was found guilty of the murder of Mary McIntosh and sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. At 8:28 a.m. on April 16, 1910, Sheriff Collier took Clinton to the yard of the jail where the gallows waited. A stockade had been built around the yard for St. Clair's execution. The sheriff asked Clinton if he had anything to say, and though Clinton's lips moved, no one heard any of his words. Father Whalen prayed with Clinton, and then his arms and legs were tied. As Sheriff Collier fastened the noose around Clinton's neck, the doomed man made eye contact with the witnesses in the front row. Then the shroud was lowered over his face. Sheriff Collier stepped over to the knob and pulled it. Clinton's massive weight fell the 5 feet and jerked to a stop. His neck broke and death was instantaneous. His body was cut down 10 minutes after the trap had fallen. The man who had accompanied the scaffold from Chicago, Mr. Davis, had witnessed over 50 hangings. He stated that this was the most efficient hanging he had ever seen. The scaffolding was dismantled and loaded for delivery back to Chicago by 3 p.m. Because of the stockade built around the jail yard, the crowd that actually witnessed the hanging was small compared to previous hangings, but there were several thousand additional people crowded on the streets outside the stockade. Clinton St. Clair's body was taken to St. Mary's Church for the funeral. Father Whalen accompanied St. Clair to the gallows and then to his burial. The priest was originally worried that there would be a crowd of morbid curiosity seekers, so they took a back way to St. Mary's Cemetery, but he didn't need to worry. There were only 2 mourners at the service, Fred St. Clair, a brother of Clinton's from Dixon, and John Pensinger of Freeport, who was a brother-in-law of Mrs. St. Clair. Bertha herself was too distraught to even attend the funeral. The time between the death of Mary McIntosh and the execution of St. Clair was just under 3 months. When officials gathered and liquidated all of Mary's assets, they found she was in a very good financial state. All of her fear and bitterness about people cheating her of her rightful money was in vain. Mary McIntosh shared with friends that she was very frightened to be alone. She kept the shutters closed on the house and she installed locks and chains on all the doors. Sadly, none of these precautions did her any good. This story should end here, both victim and killer in their graves and justice served. There is, however, one additional newspaper article, dated May 14, 1910. Clinton was a model prisoner during his incarceration, but he did suffer from some stress. Men serving time at the Winnebago County Jail would tell of Clinton's pacing back and forth in his cell. He would talk to himself, sometimes breaking out in bursts of laughter or tears. The police were probably satisfied with the whole process and were no doubt glad they were finished with the horrible case. But before long, police started to hear stories from the prisoners in the jail. All of a sudden, no one wanted to be alone in their cells. They reported hearing footsteps as though someone were pacing in their cell. A man's voice was heard, sometimes mumbling or laughing. Newspapers stated that the number of men in the jail was actually dwindling. While the police reported that St. Clair's execution was the reason crime was declining, the men in jail told a different story. They said it was because word had gotten out that the men incarcerated were afraid to be there. These prisoners had spread the story that Clinton St. Clair was still there in his cell, tortured by the crime he had committed, reliving his last few days on this earth. This is the end of our audio article. Thanks for listening.